forward on the screen. Great. So I'm Amy Sillenberg. I know a lot of you, but I'm the Executive Director at Climate Smart Missoula, and I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm going to start with a brief land acknowledgement, as we are all in Missoula. We acknowledge that we are here in Missoula on lands that have been historically and are currently inhabited by Kootenai, Salish, Pend Oreille, and other First Nations people. We acknowledge that colonists arrived here imposing new laws and norms on these lands and its people, forcibly removing them from lands they continue to call home. We recognize the deep knowledge and wisdom Indigenous peoples developed through hundreds of generations living here, wisdom which is needed now more than ever. And we will hear more about some Indigenous voices at COP here tonight, which will be really interesting. So we are lucky to have a stellar and a diverse panel here today. Missoulian.
Oh, no, I was just going to sit on it.
First-hand experience, the COP experience and perspectives our way. So I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists that we have. We have 5 panelists here as they begin sharing their experience. But I wanted to first thank Beth Shank, Molly White, Chris Filardi, Nicole Miller, and Nick Mott, our panelists tonight. So a bit of housekeeping, just how we're going to run this. The next hour is structured so that we'll pose a few questions to our panelists. We are going to encourage some cross-panelist conversation and dialogue. And then towards the end, we will open it up to questions from the attendees. My colleague Mason is actually managing the chat. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to chat in to Mason and then he'll bring some of those forward. He's pointing at himself right now. We've kind of structured it this way. Chosen this path to avoid sort of chat discussions and along the way, sometimes people get into discussions on chat and forget to actually listen to the folks that are speaking. So feel free to chat to Mason, and then at the end, again, we'll open it up to everyone. We do want to have a sort of a cross-community dialogue. So that's a bit of housekeeping. And then real quickly before we get started, just a little bit about how this came to be. I know I've always been super interested in COP. I wanted to go. I'm really curious about how all these things have gone down. And I'm sure others have really looked to, are these important? How do you agitate for change? What happens at COP? And in fact, really my Missoulian friend, Dave Morris, who's here, I think today, he was planning to go to COP and kind of represent us grassroots activists and be there in Scotland on this trip. And he wasn't able to go for COVID reasons. But he really encouraged us to have this panel because we all want to know, what was it like, right? So I knew that Beth and Chris were both headed to Glasgow, and then Molly texted me as she was getting on the airplane and she's like, I'm going, and so is my colleague Erica, and oh, did you know Nicole's going? And we're texting back and forth, and then at the end, her last text before she jumped on the plane was like, well, sounds like we've got a panel. Let's do it. So thanks, Molly, for the inspiration. And I just do love the way Missoula works. We all sort of know each other. We've heard of each other. Maybe we haven't met. I don't know if all the panelists have met, but here we are, we're meeting. And hopefully someday soon, we won't be doing this on Zoom. We'll be meeting in person. That will be lovely. But, it came together because Missoulians care and Missoulians are active and thinking about some of the greatest challenge that we face. So with that, I think we can get started. Again, thank you, panelists, and thanks to everybody for being here. I think it'll be a really fun conversation. So where we're going to start is the first, I'm going to kind of run through each panelist and with the same basic question in a few minutes. What was your role at COP? Why were you there? And how was this COP meeting for you? What was memorable? What was surprising? Maybe what was different if you've been to them before? And I'm going to start with Beth Shank, if that's okay. And Beth, I will read the bio that you have provided first, and then I'll let you jump in. So for folks that don't know, Beth Shank is the Executive Director of Environmental Stewardship for Providence. Providence is one of the nation's largest health systems, and in 2020, it announced the boldest climate goal in US healthcare, to become carbon negative by 2030. They couldn't do it without Beth, I'll just let you know. So Beth's a longtime Missoulian, and she's been leading that carbonization process in 52 hospitals, over 1,000 clinics in 7 Western states. She has pushed for including health in the climate conversation for many years, and particularly in transforming clinical practice to be environmentally safe. She's also a research assistant professor at Washington State University, researching research that focuses on awareness, behaviors, and motivation of healthcare professionals regarding climate and health. She serves on boards of 3 organizations committed to climate action, including us at Missoula. So Beth, take it away.
Well, thanks, Amy, and wonderful to be with you all. And it's an exciting opportunity to talk about our experience at COP. So I'm going to give you a bit of background as to what it meant in terms of my evolution for COP. So in Providence, we had been working toward attending since about probably April. And we, because we've made this enormous goal to become carbon negative by 2030, we were asked, and we're in fact the only US health system asked to submit a case study. And this was really for the use of health organizations, Healthcare Without Harm. The National Health Service in the UK is actually who requested it. And so we had prepared that some months ago and had been working with different organizations across, mostly in Europe and the US, but to be part of COP and to prepare for it. So been thinking about it for a long time. Also, I've been part of a group, a leadership team for nurses to create the Nurses Actions for Climate Justice, a global agenda. So that also has been going on since about May. Been meeting monthly, been working on doing podcasts for that. We have 11 specific podcasts on climate justice. So really have been working a lot toward attending. I was also invited to give a talk at COP at the World Health Organization Pavilion, which I did on November 11th. Also, I must tell you that I only got as far as Seattle. So I can tell my friends on the call the details of that, but I did not attend in person. So in the end, so what I did though, I had my whole schedule blocked. And so I attended lots of events and lots of talks. I did not get to experience the feel and the smell and the protesters and that sort of thing. I also had been part of the Sustainability Innovation Forum, which was a 3-day event of mostly private organizations and NGOs, not part of the formal proceedings, of course, and also the Bloomberg Green event, which was a 3-day event with quite a bit of, really interesting ideas. So my entire focus was about health, but also about innovation and how organizations like Providence could decarbonize, because that's what I spend all my time thinking about. I think the most memorable of even from my office at my house in the Rattlesnake was just the coordination, the networking, the interactions. I was on several different WhatsApp chats and following, so much flurry of activity. I think because this was the first year ever where there was a health presence, which is astonishing to me, there was just a sense of startup and excitement and people who have been working together across the globe, but not ever met, getting together. It was fun to be part of that, even from afar. Fun to, be plugged into the announcements from the US Center and from the World Health Organization and see John Kerry, give his daily updates as soon as he was finished for the day, that sort of thing. It was just an interesting experience. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. That was exciting and I thought went well. I think from the innovation work that I attended, I was just kind of fascinated with the discussions about private finance, about carbon accounting. I spend a lot of time in carbon accounting and we have a lot of things to work through globally before we can really hold ourselves and others accountable. And I'm interested in the detail of that. I spend a lot of time in the detail of that. So let's see. I think in a way it was more accessible than I had imagined. It was more open and spontaneous in a way, even though it was clearly very well planned and a lot of thought had gone into all the ways people were interacting. I think, as I'm sure many of you do, it was a mixed bag in terms of results. And yet I remain optimistic about the progress that was made and the questions I heard, especially, as I said, about accountability, and also the pervasive and ever-present voice about justice, which for me is what drives this work. So I'll end there. Thank you, Amy.
That was great, Beth. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to bounce over to Molly, if that's okay. Molly Waite is the director of the education program at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. She leads curriculum and training development and delivery on climate measurement, reporting, and verification. In addition to this, she provides knowledge management and monitoring and evaluation expertise on a number of the Institute's capacity develop initiatives. She's also a Climate Smart expert advisor on our Footprint Fund. So Molly helped kind of get Climate Smart started a bunch of years ago. And I believe she's been to COP before, but yeah, let's jump over to Molly.
Well, thanks, Amy, and thanks, Beth. And I can't wait to hear the other panelists. I mean, I think for those of you attendees on the call that maybe this, COP is tangential to your climate work. It's huge, right? So I just want to give that framing, so that everybody that's listening in can understand, that I think the attendance was greatest on Tuesday of the second week, and they were saying something like 35,000 participants were in kind of the designated COP area. And then there's a whole host of climate events that happen in parallel to COP in its specific form. So for me, that's both inspiring because the world gathers in this international stage and there are, just that many puzzle pieces that are all working sometimes better than others towards this common goal, right? So that's the context. My role at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute is in working in capacity development and mainly on transparency. So what that means is, like, as Beth was saying, the carbon accounting piece, the climate measurement, reporting and verification, and what that looks like for countries around the world, and in delivering training to mainly ministries that need that expertise in reporting. The highlights for me, we were invited to participate in two major campaigns, one out of the UK presidency, what they called the COP26 Catalyst for Climate Action. And so we worked, probably starting 6 months ago, on what recommendations for capacity development could be for enhancing transparency. We then also were working on a campaign called Data for Better Climate Action with the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency. Again, recognizing that majority world countries might not necessarily have access to the type of data they need at the very beginning of emissions estimates. And then we also, as an institute, have a number of alumni and growing. Right now we're we've trained roughly 8,000 alumni. So we always love COP because we get to pull alumni together and see, what they've done with their training, what they've achieved, what they're still working on, that kind of thing. So I think, probably the biggest takeaway, and I have been to other COPs, was just, and Beth spoke to maybe a piece of this, was just, thousands of people braving a really complex space amidst COVID to get there and to work on one of the biggest issues of our time. I think in previous COPs, what delegates, what party delegates go through to prepare for those negotiations. I just can't imagine being a delegate this year, because it was intense, and a lot of delegates, akin to Beth's experience, weren't able to get there. And so even, staying up late in a virtual space to still help their delegation teams and trying to advocate for what they wanted to see in the Glasgow Pact. So I'll pause there. I can't wait to hear from everybody else, and happy to take questions. So thanks, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bounce over to Chris Filardi, the co-founder and chief program officer at Neotero. So Chris is a research scientist by training. He brings to Neotero over 30 years experience building grassroots partnerships alongside indigenous peoples who sustain thriving homelands and waters. Before overseeing Neotero's programs globally, Chris established the Pacific programs at the American Museum of Natural History, regional network of research and area-based conservation initiatives, and directed and grew that effort across the tropical Pacific for over a decade. He has worked with Round River Conservation Studies, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, and the Wildlife Conservation Society, fostering Indigenous-led biodiversity science and Indigenous peoples' care for ancestral territory in area-based conservation efforts. And he's worked all over the world, but it's great to have him right here in Missoula, Montana, and he's right across the street from me, in fact. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Amy, and what a pleasure to be here with everyone. You know, Neotero, the organization that we started just about 4 years ago, has a really simple mission, and it's to work alongside Indigenous peoples around the world that uphold thriving homelands and waters that benefit all of us. And our birth point at Neotero was really a response from this overwhelming, growing evidence that some of the best places, some of the remaining fabric of a vibrant earth, was all by no accident within the territories, or not all, but hugely disproportionately in the territories of Indigenous peoples. 40% of remaining intact ecological systems, 80% of terrestrial biodiversity, of the big forests of the world, nearly half upheld by Indigenous peoples and local communities. And what brought us to COP really were two reports that I'm sure you all saw. One in 2019, one of the biggest, most comprehensive reports on the state of the living earth, of biodiversity, basically saying nothing we're doing is going to get us out of a crisis of the unraveling of Earth's life systems. Nothing in the status quo is, we need transformation across all sectors of society. And then climate report comes, the IPCC, Code Red for Humanity, and embedded in that was, we know there are these other ways, these other societal value propositions that are out there, these other knowledge systems. We don't really know how to deal with them, but we need transformation. We need to figure that out. And our birth point was trying to respond to that idea of, how do we think about a new set of societal alloys that are built of component parts, none of which alone can confront the challenges we face. So bringing together Indigenous worldviews with science, with the kind of the broader societal viewpoints and values, bringing those together into some new societal alloy. And my purpose, or our purpose at COP, was, one, really influencing the policy. And over the last couple of years, we've been supporting the training of Indigenous negotiators to go and craft policies that serve the interests of that 40% of intact ecosystem, of these sort of other societies that are living that transformational change now. We also were asked to be there as part of a bunch of big financial commitments to ground them in values and principles that would ensure those who are upholding all those spaces are actually not just consulted, but are really at the table in terms of decision making. And then lastly, it's just bringing people to a COP that was really coarsely filtered in a pretty unjust way by COVID and all sorts of other things. So we literally were financing, supporting, getting visas for Indigenous representation from nations around the world. And we went in with an incredible amount of hope, actually. It was incredible. The zero draft of some of the policy was amazing. So we had all this hope, and of course, that was somewhat broken. A lot of the language is compromised in terms of Indigenous peoples and their rights. Yeah, they'll be consulted, but free, prior, informed consent, the full at the tableness wasn't there. But a colleague of mine the other night was saying, remember the process that this is, and it's a crazy process. And you're in Glasgow. It's like a city where there are nations. You got Papua New Guineans talking 7 different languages on one side, and Pakistan literally feet away, and a peatlands pavilion. It's literally like a city of countries and issues and water and mountains and language. Incredible. And even though that language got washed out, what was amazing walking through this biggest ever COP, and all those little hallways and alleyways, it's like downtown Manhattan. And what was really powerful was, yeah, the language got weakened, but it's there. It's still there across the policy. $17 billion focused on forest and forest conservation. $2 billion of that dedicated to Indigenous peoples and local communities and their leadership and upholding of those forests. Oceans really in for the first time. And in no small part due to Indigenous peoples and others, climate, biodiversity, sustainable development were coalescing in a lot of the language and policy, recognizing that, yes, we're facing a climate crisis, but this is really about a vibrant future Earth for humanity, the beings we share this Earth with, our children's tomorrows. And I leave really hopeful, and I'll stop there because I could make a few more comments in the next phase. Thanks so much.
Wow, thank you, Chris. That's actually quite inspiring. I'm sure there's lots of questions we all have around how this all fits together with Indigenous folks and beyond. Really appreciate that. So we got 2 more folks to hear from, and then we'll bounce the questions around. Nicole, I'm going to bring you up next. Nicole Miller. Let's see. Masoner is, let's see, for Nicole. Ah, there you are. Okay.
I was like, I'm here, Amy.
Okay, I didn't see you, and I didn't see my panel either. Okay, great. Sorry, a little pause there. Nicole Miller, I'll introduce you here, is the Managing Director of Biomimicry 3.8, a certified B Corp and social enterprise dedicated to helping change makers create a more sustainable and just world by emulating nature's designs and core principles. Her background in corporate sustainability and global supply chain development supports her role in driving international strategy, projects, and initiatives as she works to bring biomimicry solutions to clients around the world to achieve climate positive and life-friendly impact goals. She joined B 3.8 in 2012 and has overseen the development of key strategy partnerships to increase access to biomimicry and worked with clients such as Google, Unilever, Ford, Microsoft, a whole bunch of others to drive innovation and regenerative design across products, materials, and place-based strategies. And she's even bringing some activating regenerative agriculture on her family's ranch. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, Nicole, take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you, Amy, for hosting this. I was so thrilled. Molly sent me a text. She's like, hey, this might be happening. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Because I think for me, I get, I think I heard someone else say this too. I think Chris, you were saying this, like I get very little opportunity to really kind of engage in our own community. So thank you for pulling this together. So for me, this is my first COP. This is my first COP experience. And so I wasn't sure what I was walking into. And it was actually quite last minute for us. We weren't sure that we were going to go because of COVID, because of travel and logistics and a lot, but we kept getting invitations and reinforcements. And so we kind of made the decision last minute to go. And things just kind of fell in place. So we made the decision to go. And a lot of that demand came from the fact that this was the first COP that nature and biodiversity had a really strong, I think, thematic coverage throughout the entire COP. Like this COP, they kind of had days kind of dedicated to different topics, and nature was one of them. And so our team was there, myself and our co-founder Janine Benyus went, and we sat in on 2 different panels. We were participating in the New York Times Climate Action Hub. And so Janine gave a talk and I moderated a panel. And so that was kind of one of our key reasons for going. And then another key reason was really a lot of our clients and collaborators were there, as Molly was saying, like so many people from around the world are coming to this space. And so we had a lot of our partners and collaborators who were there. And there's a lot of discussion around nature positive, nature-based solutions. And so we were really there kind of forging partnerships and projects around designing what that meant. And so we had some really kind of exciting conversations around that, and some really key projects that are coming out of our conversations there. So we participated for those kind of two primary reasons, and we were part of the I think the kind of as Molly was saying, there's so many things going on. You've got the blue zone for the delegates, the green zones for a lot of the kind of exhibits, and then you've got the New York Times Climate Hub, and there was like the Project House, the Bloomberg, like there was so much going on. It was kind of hard to keep it all straight, but we were there largely, I think, working with the business community about how do we activate change, and how do we really kind of create a strategy towards nature positive, which is really this look beyond net zero, which is a lot of the language that you're seeing around how companies are achieving their goals. And we are really kind of driving this agenda around, net zero is not enough. Net zero will not get us to 1.5, but designing in a way that is in benefit to nature is a way that which we can achieve those goals. So that's a lot of what our role was, and a lot of our participation was around that conversation, and specifically working with businesses to kind of drive and lead that.
Great, thank you. That's pretty interesting. I'm sure you and Chris have some things to chat about.
I know, I was taking notes, Chris, as you were talking.
Okay, so we do have one more panelist. We're going to bring up here Nick Mott. Nick is we'll swap over to him, but Nick is a multimedia journalist. He's a producer at the Peabody award-winning podcast Threshold, and has also produced the acclaimed podcast Rich's Hill, Fireline, and Shared State for Montana Public Radio. His reporting on climate, natural resources, and the environment has appeared on NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Outside, High Country News, The Washington Post, and of course, the highly esteemed Montana Public Radio, among other outlets. And he sent his bio to me at the last minute, at the very end.
I shouldn't have fessed up to this.
Technically, I'm not former Missoulian, because he's actually mostly living over the divide in Livingston. But we're going to call you one of our own because you still work for Montana Public Radio, which is right here in Missoula. And we know you still report on this area. And I think it's actually really neat to have heard now from people that were there with their expertise participating in the panel, and then to have a journalist. I have been listening to Amy and Nick in the Threshold podcast of being in COP, and I was really intrigued by what you guys had to offer. So I'm really grateful that you could jump in at the last minute, whether you actually pay rent in Missoula or not. We'll take that.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. It's great to be here. So I was there with Threshold, and we were reporting we did a few dispatches that came out as we were there, and we also, the bulk of our reporting for the upcoming season of our show. If you don't know Threshold, each season we do a deeper dive over a series of long episodes into one environmental story. So our first season was about bison, our second season was all about the Arctic, our third season was about oil and gas drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and this upcoming season we're not quite spilling the beans on yet, but obviously it'll have some stuff to do with COP. And so a big part of our goal going to Glasgow was to be able to communicate and translate what's happening there and why it matters to everybody, even if you're not deep in the weeds on climate policy, or even if you're just a regular person, say in Missoula. And it was my first COP, first time in Glasgow also, and I learned a lot. And I think folks have already said a great deal about it, and I'm happy to get into the weeds of COP as well. But, I think maybe one thing that could be useful would be translating like how it actually, what the physical space is like, what it's like to be there. So I'll try to walk you all into what's called the blue zone, which the blue zone is, like we've heard, there's all kinds of things happening everywhere. There's the blue zone, the green zone, there's side events like the New York Times Climate Hub and Bloomberg Green and all this other stuff going on. But the blue zone is where negotiations are happening. It's where the world leaders are. It's also where all these other things are happening. It's like a conference, multiple conferences within one conference. But when you walk in, there's often a giant line. You go through security and you get inside, and the COP changes location every COP, but the place, it feels like, at least in Glasgow, I'd say it feels like an airport terminal is what I continually tell people. There is no sense of place. Like there aren't even any windows in any rooms. You are in this giant terminal, and someone else described it as like downtown Manhattan, which I think also works because everybody is speaking different languages. Everybody's rushing around like Manhattan style on a mission to get somewhere. You have the pavilions, which people have referenced, which is like one of the many conferences inside there. It's where countries and other coalitions and groups can display work that they're doing and also hold a number of panels. It's like this giant maze of booths. Some of them entice you with coffee and snacks. You go farther into it and you have the negotiating rooms and workspaces and these big giant plenary rooms where these bigger events take place. But those negotiating rooms as well are rooms that not as many people are allowed into, and the rooms where a lot of that nitty-gritty business and deal making happens. And so I would say just navigating that space, learning this like placeless space at which so many giant decisions are being made really stands out to me, in addition to navigating everything outside of it, which is super, super interesting to me. So I'd love to hear what questions people have. So I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Nick. And I'm really glad you guys are here. You and Amy both longtime Missoula people would keep you as our own. So yeah, thanks. We got to hear from everybody. I'm going to run through and bounce one more question back to everybody here, and then we can do it a little more popcorn style and ask each other questions. But we're, again, for the folks that didn't get to go to COP, we're just thinking, well, so what do we do with this? And I guess would like to know what you think you or COP you can bring back to this area, or what COP sort of means for us who are really interested in, climate solutions and actually addressing climate change at the scale and urgency and pace that needs to happen. So if you have thoughts about, what we bring back, whether that's good or whether that, positive, hopeful stuff, or whether that's some frustrating challenges pieces of it, if you can, what does it mean to us? And yeah, let's see. Nick, do you want to have anything to offer that while you're on?
I can start. Yeah, in terms of whether it's positive or hopeful or not is something I'm still processing. I think I'm still processing some of my final thoughts about it, and I have some. One thing I've been thinking about today is one thing I read, and I think Andrew Revkin's newsletter saying like COP is not something that creates change. COP is reflective of change happening in the global community. But I'll just leave that thought there. In terms of what it brings home for me, I think the biggest thing is the sheer power of all of those people passionate about this one issue. So we have tens of thousands of people there in the Blue Zone for the event. We have hundreds of thousands on the street. I've never been somewhere where it's so clear, where the urgency of the issue is so clear, and also in many ways in the event, like so dissociated from its actual impact. So I remember reading one article saying like, if negotiators had windows to look outside, they'd see what's at stake, but they don't. Yeah, but that I think the power of that many people devoted to this one thing that unites them, even if the outcomes are not ideal, is something that I'm bringing home with me. It's easy to feel in a vacuum. It's easy to feel, one person I talked with he's a member of the Klamath tribe based in Oregon, told me that coming to a space like that makes him feel less lonely, that to see other people like him and people that aren't like him in this space, all advocating in some sense for the same thing. And I think it made me feel less lonely in some ways too. In other ways, more lonely maybe, but I like that thought that seeing this many people and the power of this many people in this space can make you feel less lonely in this pursuit.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm hoping I can go one of these years myself. That's really neat. I'm just going to popcorn it around. Molly, how might you respond to that? What do you bring back for us or for you?
Gosh, in a nutshell, I think things like this, I was, just to back up, Amy, when I messaged you from the airport, it's because I saw a sign that I think there is you organized a demonstration maybe before COP, and there was, somebody holding a sign that says the revolution will be relational. And so it's these little things that you don't think are going to influence somebody wherever they are. And especially in climate change, when it's such a, geopolitical, massive system-wide change problem / challenge that we all have a role in it. On Glasgow, I was passing the street, I went down the, for those of you there that were there, the street where the river, I'm a Missoulian, I call it a river. There's probably a better term for what it was in Glasgow, but a whole street full of children's artwork that, they made to display for everybody going in and out of COP. And art is powerful. And so I think when I think about what I bring back is it's easy to be a pessimist if you're a spectator. And I think you could probably see the hope in everybody on today's panel that, if you're in the weeds trying to work on this issue from whatever angle or influence you have, I think that's where we'll get it eventually. By golly, by gum. That's it. Yeah. Back to you, Amy.
Okay, that's great. The revolution is relational. I like that. But Beth Shank, do you have some thoughts about bringing things home?
Well, I think, in a real practical sense, being able to talk about COP, including not just me, but one of our vice presidents was at COP and presented as well. So we're able to kind of leverage that in Providence in ways that I think is super helpful. I mean, a lot of people haven't heard of it. They don't know what it means. They don't know what it stands for. And as we are trying to educate, we have 120,000 employees, which we're trying to educate them about what does it mean? Why is healthcare an issue in the climate movement? And what do we do about it? It's very helpful. It's tangible. It's telling stories. It's telling about experience. It's getting attention drawn in a different way. And that's, it's kind of it's almost like a weird juxtaposition with the pandemic, because healthcare has been crushed by the pandemic. But this is something that I've seen over these past 2 years, many times over, is that people seem to be, and we're along the West Coast, so it's people who've been living with fires, a little bit more progressive. People seem to be relieved and excited to talk about climate work. I would not have anticipated that, given the pandemic and what it's doing to healthcare professionals and the whole systems. But I have found that it's actually kind of a bright spot. So this, in a way, is another bit of that bright spot. Also, I just really feel like it's kind of a jumping off place for health and healthcare. It seems, because I've been working in this for a long time, I just think it's so obvious that health is truly at stake. I mean, people are dying in droves, and many millions of people will die related to climate. We already know that. It's built into the cake. And yet that message is hard to get out, even though the social science shows that it's probably the most impactful message for humans. So it's very gratifying to see that kind of come together. I'm optimistic that a door has been cracked there, and there's room for more messaging. Same as the way I'm optimistic about the voice of injustice, as I was saying before, that even though the reparations are not part of the plan today, I feel like that voice is no longer silenceable. And I feel like enough people have heard that, have heard the need and see the incredible suffering that happens in many parts of the world other than Missoula, Montana, and other places. So I'm optimistic about both of those. I feel like those are breakthroughs. And so in a practical sense, I want to talk about it, and am talking about it. Use it, educate with it, remind people about it, already talk about Cairo, say, where are we going next? What is health doing? So thanks.
No, that's great. A lot of inspiration to all the people that you work with. That's awesome. How about hop over to Nicole? Yeah, what are you bringing back to our community or
Yeah.
your?
Well, I have to be honest and say that, you know, I got home Friday about 1:30 in the morning, and on Saturday saw the I think it was Saturday evening or maybe Sunday morning, it all blurred together. Saw kind of the final deal, and I was, like Chris said, I was a little broken and sad, especially after being there and seeing all those protesters and just how much heart was there. I mean, I just thought we would get further. And so I definitely had to like go lay on the earth and feel grounded and feel reconnected, because it was a little harsh. I like reading that and hearing that. But I have to be optimistic. I think to do this work, you have to be. And so I think I quickly went back into that optimism space and really reflecting on the fact that there was a nature day. There was, you know, like it was the first time that nature had a day, but also Indigenous communities were there in the way that they were represented, as Chris talked about. And like those two things alone, and the conversation, you know, the intersection of climate justice and social justice, how those were kind of woven together, and that they are no longer two separate things, but we're having this conversation about those intersections and looking holistically at kind of systemic solutions. And the conversation about, we spent some time in the Climate Hub, and there was a nature bar that was put together by Voice for Nature, David de Rothschild's organization, and the Natural History Museum. And that was a space that was fully dedicated to authentic conversation, like true emotion around what we are going through as a species with this climate crisis. And the space was beautifully designed. There was like, it was like such a welcoming space. And I was reflecting on that and how many people came through that space over the 4 days that they hosted that nature bar, and the amazing connection and conversation that happened there. And so I guess what I'm bringing back is, you know, that urgency, I think in our work has been there, and I think it was reinforced. But those connections of people who are really motivated and empowered to activate change, and those, I think, relationships were further codified by the maybe lack of commitment that we saw, and where I personally come from is that I think business can be such a driver for change, and we saw that, and we're seeing that, and you know, in our work, we're really about demonstrating what's possible when we use 3.8 billion years of R&D and nature to design, that we can design a better world, a world that is beneficial to all life. And I think for us, what we're seeing is like a double down on that commitment from companies who want to see that, who want to exist in that future world. And I think that's what gives me hope. And I think for this community, you know, what I think is essential is, as a community, we can keep demonstrating what's possible. We can keep demonstrating how communities can rally to make change. And I think that's how, you know, I'm hopeful that it's really never government that makes big change. It's people and it's community. And when we demonstrate what's possible, and when we use our voice, and when we have those projects to really put data and examples to kind of the narrative that we're telling, then I think we really drive change. So I think it just put more urgency behind what I'm doing. And I think it really, I think for me personally, I think kind of codified a lot of the things that we were already activating. So I think that gives me hope and encouragement as well.
Great, that's great to bring some of that hope back here. Chris, I'll pass it over to you, and then I know we have some questions. I think we'll open it up, and Mason has a question to pop back. But Chris, yeah, what's your reflection like in bringing us back to Missoula?
Thanks, Amy. And there's a nice thing about kind of at least of the panelists going last, because yes, all that. And just remembering what this colleague of mine said late last night, this is a process, and it's a reflective process. It's highly political, and it can help set the tone. But what I was reflecting on in that process, in that crazy space, was, I'm sure you've all heard or read Arundhati Roy's kind of framing of the pandemic as a portal. And this idea that these historically pandemics have forced us to imagine a new world, and they're a portal, right? It's this gateway between one world and the other. And we can either choose to walk through it, which is like dragging the carcasses of like hatred and all the crap, the dead data, dead ideas, dead river, all that. Or we could walk through lightly, carrying almost nothing, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And there were tens of thousands of people in that place who not just ready to fight, they are fighting. And some of them literally for their lives and their existence. And that's what I bring back.
Yeah, I think, in our own small ways, we're all trying to fight for that here. And we're trying to figure out how to stay connected to that larger world. So thank you, Chris, because I think it's really important that we know that we are one, we are all fighting for this stuff together. Yeah, thank you. That was really good. Seems like there's a lot I'm sure you guys are continuing to think about. Hey, Mason, I know you said there was a question or two, and maybe we'll jump in there if you want to toss that out to the team here.
Yeah, so the first question we have is for, it's just an open question to all panelists. So Martha asks, the BBC reported that 500 of the delegates representing at the COP meeting work for fossil fuel corporations. She asks, I'm curious how obvious their influence was in Glasgow to each of you. So just an open question to.
Yeah, anybody want to respond to that? I know we've all been curious, like, how did these 500 people working for the other side, how'd they get there? Were they there? Anybody have something to offer to bump into them? Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'm an advocate for business, not so much oil and gas. So no, I actually, interestingly enough, I didn't, even though we were participating in a lot of like the Sustainable Innovation Forum, which was largely where the business community was, we didn't really interface with a lot of them. I think, I mean, I'll be honest, like there was a lot of greenwashing and a lot of green wishing in that, Sustainable Innovation Forum that was really obvious. I think in some cases, I mean, everyone was throwing around nature-based solutions and not really even knowing in some cases clearly what that meant. I sat in on one panel that was about how do we make nature bankable, which was awful to just see that was a conversation. But I guess for me, I didn't personally see that at the events that I was in. Maybe Molly or Chris or Nick, those who are in the blue zone, maybe you had more direct experience with them. But in the conversations I was part of, even which was highly business oriented, I didn't see a lot of the oil and gas. I think they were laying low.
I can chime in just a little. I agree they were laying low. I mean, I think one way to sort of set up their role is that, there are a few different layers of people involved in COP. There are people in the negotiating room going back and forth, changing the words that end up getting agreed to. And then there are people that essentially function as lobbyists trying to influence that. And I think that's where a lot of those oil and gas people were, trying to influence what was happening there. And 550 or something is a lot, but there were thousands of folks who are not oil and gas. But it's not surprising to me that oil and gas representatives were there, and I'm not sure they had much actual sway. Like, I think that I have no basis to say this. I didn't talk with John Kerry about it or observe his interactions with them. But the US, the EU, and many other countries have vested economic interests in keeping many things the same and pushing against many things that were proposed. I mean, as do countries like China and India that at the end of the day ended up proposing the phase down coal language in the final document, if you all heard about that drama. So the long story short is, yes, there were oil and gas industry there, but no, they were not a visible presence there, at least to me.
Anybody else want to weigh in, or we can keep rolling?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, following Nicole's conversation about the Sustainability Innovation Forum, there were a number of energy companies, which is the new name for oil and gas, perhaps, but a lot of innovative energy stuff that I was utterly fascinated to learn more about. And so I really enjoyed just hearing, okay, what's in development? How feasible is it? Where are you? How much money are you talking about? So no one came out and said, we are BP talking about this new product, but there was an awful lot going on about energy. And I'm sure that is a transformation of the oil and gas to some extent.
Yeah, and just to the points, that what Nick was saying, that just being inside those negotiating spaces, there is influence on some of the members, and those, the presence of those sorts of individuals do influence some of the delegations who are scripting and engaging in that tinkering with language that occurs in the negotiating room. So that was really my only indication. It wasn't an overt, but it was very clear that some of those interests were influencing some of the member states that were in those rooms.
Martha, I'd just welcome you to share the link of what you read. I'd be curious. The other thing, Mason, I just shared the Environmental Bulletin. So this is a bulletin that is published each day of COP, and the link I just shared. So Mason, I don't know if you can hijack the chat and share it with the group, but this is the final one. And so if you're interested in like the cliff notes, the 40-page cliff notes of, which delegates were saying what, I think what we're talking about here is the usual suspects of, who's adjusting and negotiating text for fossil fuel industry versus others that are, calling for massive climate finance reallocation. So it's interesting, and if you're curious about those moving parts in the negotiation rooms, it kind of gives a good little snapshot.
Great, thanks. Do the panelists have any questions for each other, given what they've heard today, like something that they really wonder? You guys were all in really different meetings and focused on different things. I'm just curious if there's any questions you guys want to pop out to any individuals or the team.
I have a question. It's Beth. And it's really just, Molly, you reminded me of this, just the conversations. I don't know if this was present everywhere, but I heard so much about finance and this, the referring to $130 trillion. And I had previously, just about a month earlier, heard about 92, as I recall, $1 trillion searching for investment in green technologies, et cetera. How present was that for you all as a theme or as something that, seemed like it could be a partial solution or a hindrance?
Yeah, I think I agree. I heard a lot about that, and particularly in the Sustainable Innovation Forum, that was clearly present in the conversation. And I think what that money is searching for is demonstration and pilots and proof points of what that investment can be. I think what at least what we see in our work a lot of times is that there's good ideas and there's and then there's the kind of the money, and the money is interested in seeing that idea move into activation or demonstration or pilot or proof or whatever. And so I think it's putting all the pieces together in terms of getting seed money to move ideas forward. And then once the idea is far enough along, getting additional investment to actualize it and give the, further. So I think that's maybe even relates to kind of how just like new idea, general innovation moves forward, is like you need those different phases of investments and those different level of risks that people are willing to take to move things forward. But yeah, I think we definitely heard that people are interested in, and I think just a few weeks before, Larry Fink of BlackRock was saying, like the next unicorns of investment are in the green tech space. So I think anyone who is demonstrating what's possible with new innovation and new technology is very well primed for financing. I think it's just how far do these companies need to see proof points in terms of, moving the needle, and what does that look like?
Yeah, and can it be done at the scale and urgency, which
exactly scale and urgency are two keywords.
Exactly.
I can chime in just a little bit again, at the fear of talking too much here. The $130 trillion figure was a coalition of basically financial institutions, banks, investors, groups like that, who were worth that much money, who vowed, who pledged to put climate, sort of at the center of their work going forward. What that means is unclear, unenforceable, as is everything with COP, not enforceable. The finance that I was most confronted with had to do with, what was referred to as climate finance which was a $100 billion fund that was basically still not fulfilled, although it should have been by, I think, 2020. It's been pushed back to 2024 now. The years are blurring in my brain. That was dollars that are not yet reached. Other money that is not yet pledged, although small amounts happen, was towards loss and damage, as someone mentioned earlier. So climate finance in various forms was certainly a big topic, but it's really interesting to hear, a lot of what people have been saying tonight is what stands out to them, and the conversations that most stand out weren't just in the text of the decision that was made among countries, but like in these other panels and relational things that happened, including in the business community. And the business community does have a huge role in our climate future. So it's really it's really just interesting to hear that these conversations are happening. I'm really curious to see what does continue to unfold within the business community in the future.
Sorry, I was muted. We are at 8 o'clock, and I know there's still a few more questions out there, and I'm hoping we could just stand for just a couple minutes so that we can, I don't want to end on just like the money piece of it. That doesn't seem quite right. So yeah, a couple of different things we could do from here. Steve Running, are you out there in the world? I see your name. Are you still there? Say hello.
We have a few questions here from.
Okay, we have a couple more. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge Steve.
Yeah.
I think Steve was, it's on the paper in the Missoula, you've been to COP, and so there was a question around, were the scientists there? And Steve, you're at least a semi-retired scientist. I wondered I did wonder if scientists were there, or Steve, as a scientist who's been doing this work for so long, if you wanted to either ask a question or comment to that. It does seem like that, my understanding anyways, was that the science was what gave the meetings what they needed to know, and this was more about the policy pieces of it. But if anybody wants to weigh in on that, or maybe Steve, what do you have to say?
Yeah, that's really the case, that that the science crowd does IPCC.
Mhm.
And the only COP I went to was the meltdown COP in Copenhagen, 2009. But there's a few scientists that go when they are directly part of the entourage of their country. But very few scientists go otherwise.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say in listening to this hour, the thought occurred to me probably a decade ago that doing the climate science was the easy part because our instruments don't fight back. You just record the data and write the paper. And so what you all are doing now is the hard part. And we've been imagining that for a long time, that getting society to decide what to do and prioritize what to do and get motivated to do anything is the hard part. And this is what you all are thick in the middle of. And I really salute all of you because it, as we all know all too well, we need all the motivation that we can get.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that's really good. That maybe let's do any of the panelists want to respond to that or offer any parting words? I do want to be cognizant of time. I know a lot of you guys are probably still recovering from having been gone, and there's a world and families and things out there. Does anybody want to respond to that or offer any final words that come to mind? And just so folks know, if you're going to drop, if you need to drop off, again, it's just a few minutes here. We'll add some of the links that were shared today and some of the information, some of the readings on the webpage that we have where we shared this link. We can use that as a place to glean pull some of this stuff together, and we'll also put the recording there. So it won't be lost if you didn't catch the chat or something like that. We'll have some follow up. And if you can't find it or something, just, you can get in touch with any of us at Climate Smart. But any thoughts from Steve's commentary or the work that needs to happen here?
Just to say, there was one big, Steve, you'd like to know this. There was one big, I feel like the scientists go to COP when they have a big announcement, but I don't know if you've been tracking the methane recalculation. So that's a big one. And they were there presenting.
Well, and I also, I did a panel with 4 women scientists. So I will share the link to that panel. And it was, and Molly reminded me because methane was part of that discussion. So there were some scientists there. And Steve, I just want to thank you for your comment, because I think the work does feel overwhelming and daunting at times. So appreciate you acknowledging that and teeing us up to do this work.
Absolutely, we have to do it because we have to do it together. So I think from all of us at Climate Smart, we're really appreciative again of all the panelists being here. Do listen to Threshold. Nick, it's been great to hear from you guys and from Amy, who goes way back here in Missoula, and we'll put some of those links too. But I think let's carry forward and celebrate the wins and the connections that we have. And hopefully you guys can stay in touch with us at Climate Smart. We're really looking forward to getting together and not being on Zoom. I think we're at least hopefully trending in that direction. We're gonna have some kind of a year-end gathering we'll let folks know about. But this has been a really fun conversation, and thanks for going to
Amy, before everybody jumps, can we do a Zoom hug for Missoula? If everybody just puts their arms out like this, we can all hold hands and we have a circle on Zoom.
Okay, and then folks can do that. I'll hit the screen share. Everybody out that's out there. If you
attendees, I want to see your faces.
That's super important.
Oh, look at those kiddos.
I love it.
There.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna get a little. We've got a few more. All right, a couple more folks coming in.
Keep holding them. Hold out your wings. Your biomimic wings. Here. take flight.
All right, I got a couple screenshots there.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for coming together, and let's look for opportunities to stay together as we go forward. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, panelists.
Right. We got it. Thanks, Mason.
Yeah, that went well. That was smooth.
All right. Appreciate your help. Thanks a
Absolutely.
lot. All right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one.